Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this month's edition of Octopus 101. I am your host, John Bristow. I'm the Community Director here at Octopus Deploy, and I'd like to thank you for your time and attention joining us here today. This is a live webinar. Q&A is enabled. If you want to let us know where you're joining from in the chat, feel free to let us know, and welcome everyone. So Octopus 101 is a new webinar series that we're running monthly. And the purpose of this is to expose people to Octopus. Basically, for folks who have never seen Octopus or maybe have kicked the tires once or twice, but really don't have a comfortable understanding of what it is and how it works, this is the webinar for you. So again, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Our goal in this webinar is to kind of teach you the fundamentals of what Octopus is, how it works, kind of show you a lap around the UI, etc., and talk about some of the nuances about Octopus that help get you started, basically. So, as I said, if you've never seen Octopus before, this is a great webinar for you to attend. Tell your friends and family if you want about Octopus, show them this webinar. This will be available up on YouTube. So let us get started. First and foremost, if you need to reach me, you can reach me at this email address. So I'm happy to answer any emails that you have if you have any questions. Otherwise, I can point you to the right folks here at Octopus who maybe have an answer more educated than me. That's probably very likely. But feel free to reach out, let me know. This webinar is using a platform called Session, and Session is a pretty interactive platform. It allows us to do a bunch of great little things. So you can send us emojis, you can submit questions, you can let us know what you think about certain features. So feel free to interact. And the whole reason why we're doing this live is because we want to make sure that you're getting your answers your questions answered. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A. It is enabled right now. Alternatively, you can use the chat, and we'll go ahead and answer those live directly in this webinar. And if you see anything, just let us know through emojis. That's always appreciated. So there you go. In addition to that, this webinar is also being recorded. So you'll see, you'll get an email at the end of this webinar telling you, hey, the recording is now available. Feel free to check it out, including all the links that we'll include. In addition to that, we'll also post a recording of this to YouTube. So hello, everyone viewing this on YouTube. I hope to see you on the next one. So with that, let's go ahead and kind of outline what we're going to see in this webinar. So as I said, this is a great way to see Octopus for the first time. So what we're going to do here is show you how Octopus works, and more importantly, talk to you about why you should use it. So oftentimes, Octopus, and other technology, any technology for that matter, understanding the why kind of helps you understand the how. So if we kind of dive into the why Octopus exists and how it works, then I think you have a broad understanding of what its purpose is. In addition to that, we'll teach you some of the fundamentals around Octopus. So namely, we'll take a look at things like projects, spaces, deployment processes, releases. These are the basic pieces of the building blocks, if you will, of Octopus. And we call that our model. And one of the reasons why customers love Octopus is because we model deployments so well. And when people start to use Octopus and they start to think in terms of the way we model software deployments, they really understand, okay, I understand what you're going at here. This aligns perfectly to my thinking. Third, we'll take a look at how we can create a deployment process. This is the act of getting software into the hands of your users, and that's done via the deployment process. The deployment process, if you remember nothing else, it's basically a way in which you get software from point A to point Z. And so a deployment process outlines a series of steps that are run, and those steps include a variety of things like, set up infrastructure, or execute this script, or provision something via Terraform, etc. And then go about putting the DLLs, the exes, the zips, whatever it is that you have into the machines or into the hands of the users that you're targeting. And then finally, we'll see how we can actually kick off a deployment process through a CI process or server. CI stands for continuous integration. And we typically think of this as developers as build servers. So if you're a developer or a practitioner, you'll think of a build server. Some common examples include GitHub Actions. Others include TeamCity. Azure Pipelines is very popular. These and other sort of solutions, this is really where life starts in terms of a pipeline. And so moving left to right, a pipeline starts typically in a build process, then it goes through tests, etc. Then eventually it gets over to Octopus, where we do a deployment. And so we'll talk about how that all gets triggered and show some examples of that. So with that, let's go ahead and lay the scene, so to speak. So we have a blank canvas here. So typically, what happens when developers are operating, they're doing a lot of stuff. They're operating on code. They're doing a lot of work with unit tests. They're building out solutions. They're building out architectures. But at the end of the day, they're mostly focused on this job of building out features and maintaining good software practices, etc. A challenge, though, that they have is that somewhere off in the nether region is this infrastructure that I eventually have to ship to. Those things could be build servers. Those things could be individual client machines. Those could be file locations, etc. There's some this nebulous sort of structure of infrastructure that I want to deploy to, and that poses a challenge, right? Because there's a wide chasm, a wide gap between where developers sit and where they want their software to live. And so they'll use a combination of tools. In addition to that, we typically think of this as continuous integration if you're prescribing to this sort of DevOps philosophy. So continuous integration is ideas that we test often and early in our development stages, and we utilize a variety of tools and processes for this capability. And typically, you'll use a wide variety of solutions. Some examples that I cite here include things like TeamCity from JetBrains, GitHub Actions, Jenkins is very popular, Circle CI, Azure Pipelines, Bitbucket. These are all basically a combination of code repositories and scripts that run to do work against code. So they maintain source control, they have issues, etc. But then you'll notice there's still this wide gap between CI and the eventual infrastructure you have to run. You may use a combination of tools here. You may use a tool like Terraform or Pulumi to stand up infrastructure. But still, it's left to your own devices to bridge that gap. Basically, you have to write a lot of custom scripts to get your software over to the infrastructure. And that's where Octopus fits in. So Octopus is basically a solution that will integrate with a large number of these build servers. And they'll basically define a model by which you want to define your deployments. So deployments come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes, and they define a lot of things. And so that's where Octopus operates. And so the idea is that you'll take your end result from a build and a test, et cetera, will be a binary, and you will then pass it over, what we call a package. We pass it over to Octopus, and you say, please, Octopus, defined on the way in which you've defined a deployment process, please now deploy this to my infrastructure. And so that's basically what Octopus does. If you think of the entire pie of DevOps and pipelines, et cetera, we operate in a very thin wedge, but we do so very well. And that's part of the reason why customers love us. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into a demo. This isn't going to be a slide-heavy sort of presentation. I'm going to try and make this as demo-rich as possible. So through the magic and power of software, I will go ahead and bring up my web browser. There we go. So if you haven't seen Octopus before, this is octopus.com. You can download a software trial here. Octopus is installable both on Windows, but we also have a SaaS version of it. So you can actually utilize Octopus in the cloud, and we maintain it for you, and you don't have to worry about it all, which is awesome. So if you want to check it out, you can go to octopus.com. This should be your homepage, if not a bookmark, and you'll find all kinds of examples of how we work and what we do here if you want to check us out. In addition to that, just wanted to highlight this here. We also have a number of updates that we post all the time. So we're now operating on 23.3, so our latest release was shipped earlier last month. And a bunch of features are listed there. We publish all of our updates on this page. So again, this is a great page to check out if you want to see what's happening in the world of Octopus. So let's go ahead and jump over to a quick example here. So this is my sort of like rubbish bin of projects that I typically create up and down. So I've got a instance of Octopus Cloud running here. And what I'd like to do is draw your attention to this place here called space. So a space is like a isolated area where I can do work within Octopus. So we allow you to separate your projects into spaces. It's kind of like a collection type thing. And there you can designate things like, what rights and privileges people have. If you have a number of users on your team, there's a bunch of other things you can do. But let me go ahead and create a new space. So I'm going to call this Octopus 101. I'm going to designate myself as a manager, and I can specify a bunch of stuff as well. But we've gone ahead and created a new space. So let's go ahead and jump into that space and see what's there. So not much. This is kind of like the blank startup hello world of Octopus. And what we do is we actually provide you a curated experience here to get you started. So in here, you'll see the ability to watch a video. This is a very high level video of, kind of how to get started with Octopus, but you can also click this green button and this will walk you through the process of getting up and running. So I'm going to create a new project and I'll call this Hello Octopus. There are some other features here as well. I'll just briefly point out here. So you have the ability to use version control for this project. So a project is basically, it's the way in which you think about deployment processes. So projects can map to, say, a web application you're building, or maybe a set of microservices that you're targeting, things like that. So if you're building an application, let's say you're building, let's say a rich client application for Windows, or you're building a website that's going to run on Nginx, you're going to think of those things in terms of those separate deliverables. So a project is basically a collection of steps that you want to execute against that. And so I'm creating a project here that's just loosely named, but there you go. So use version control for this project. What we have the ability to do is you can actually, rather than using our internal database for storing this stuff, what we can do is we can emit this stuff to a text-based file. We call this configuration as code, but basically what this allows you to do is once you have that text-based file, you can then check it into source control. And that turns out to be really powerful, because then that allows you to edit that file after the fact and have version control and branches and all that sort of stuff. So if you want to use that, you can. You can specify a bunch of other things in here as well, but I'll just go ahead and assume the defaults and hit save. The next question we need to ask you is, okay, what sort of environments are you going to target to? So the concept of environments in Octopus is this idea is that if you think about, typically how you do software development is you'll typically do it in development, and then you'll push it into staging, which is an area where it's like, hey, this is probably a strong candidate for us to release. And then there's what's in production. And we define these environments because they allow us to do interesting things around them. So you can define deployment processes that target only certain environments, for example. And this is really nice in case you want to turn things on or off, for example, as part of your deployment process. And so by default, we give you these three because this is typically how most software development is done, but you can add others. The names of these don't matter. You can name these whatever you want. But these are just basically three common examples that we come up with. So I'll create those environments and hit save. All right, so at this point, we've defined a space, we defined a project, and we've defined three environments: dev, staging, and production. The next thing we need to do is define a deployment process. So out of the box, we provide you with two very simple examples. And you'll notice here that we actually support a variety of languages. So we support PowerShell, we support Bash, we also support F#, C#, etc. So you can write these deployment processes in a variety of languages. That being said, you don't have to, this is the underpinning language for the deployment process. We actually provide you a nice sort of curated experience on top of that for defining these things. So let's go ahead and create a new process. So what we're doing here is we're creating a deployment process, which is a series of steps for basically deploying your code. And you'll notice here, we categorize these in a variety of different ways. So you have things like, steps for Kubernetes, you have steps for other operations as well. We also have a huge library of community steps as well. So if you're at all interested, you can target one of those steps. And because software and the ecosystem is so varied and there's a lot of different ways in which you can deploy software, there's a lot of different steps in here. So there's steps for Firebase and step for F5 and HashiCorp Vault and, Twilio, etc. And these and other steps you can combine together if you want. Now, because this is probably a very simple example, I'm just going to run a script. This is probably the easiest thing, but it is one of the most popular steps we have used by customers. So I'm going to add this run a script step, and it's going to take me into this view here. And what this is basically telling me is basically, okay, I'm going to run a step here. This is the series of steps you see in this column here that I'm highlighting with my mouse. These are the series of steps we'll execute as part of my deployment process. So this is what's defining my deployment process here. On the right-hand side here, this is basically the specific settings that I have for this step. So I can define a bunch of settings here. We're going to largely ignore most of these, and we're just going to basically execute the one that's defined here. Now, this is based in PowerShell, but as I said before, you can write this in a variety of languages. This is the underpinning language that we support for this, and you can choose whichever one you want. There's a bunch of other settings as well that you'll need to basically understand, but as you get used to Octopus, you'll see it as it runs. There are this notion of what are called workers. So when you execute a deployment process, you can do so in a variety of different ways. You can you can run that deployment process on a particular deployment target that you define. So these targets may be web servers, for example, or you can run these as part of what's called a worker process. So a worker is basically this agent that will sit there and wait for tasks to execute. If you've ever used something like GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps or any of these other CI products, they have a similar notion as well. These are basically processes that just sit there and waiting and like checking the watch and asking, okay, what do you got for me? So a worker is basically there to do work. And so we're going to run this on a predefined worker called hosted Windows. This is what comes with Octopus Cloud when you go ahead and install it. And then there's a bunch of other operations that I can run as well. So I'm going to ignore those for now, just hit save. So that's been saved, and we have our deployment process. And if we take a look at the overview there, you'll notice that there's nothing that's been defined. We haven't defined any releases. So the next step for us to do is actually create a release and then deploy that release. So I'm going to go ahead and create a release. Now, what you may be a little bit confused here, but that's okay. So a release is a snapshot. It is a copy, a point in time of everything that you've defined relative to your deployment process, your environments, all the variables that you may define as well. We haven't talked about variables, but we'll talk about that in a second. And it gives it a version number. And that version number allows you to define a bunch of things as well. You can specify a variety of wildcards in here if you wanted to as well. You can use implement semver, for example. There's a lot of things that you can do here. But a release is basically a snapshot of all those values. So we're going to head and hit save. And what this is now going to say is, okay, I've got all the information necessary to do a deployment. So I've got a knowledge of the deployment process, all the state of all the variables that you may have defined, any packages you may have given me, like a DLL, for example, to go and move that into development or staging. And now I'm ready to go ahead and do deployment. So let's go ahead and say deploy to development. And I can specify a variety of options here if I want to. So I can say, actually, I want this deployment to actually fire off later, or I want to fire it off right now. I can also, if I so choose, exclude certain steps from this point in time release. So let's say, I don't know, for whatever reason, you need to get a release out and there's a step in your deployment process you want to skip over, you're going to go ahead and do that. There's a bunch of other settings as well that you can define, but we're going to ignore those because this is 101, and we'll hit deploy. Now, at this point, you've done your deployment, and we kick over to this task log. So in addition to defining deployment processes, we give you a lot of transparency into what's actually happening under the covers. So a task log is actually what you see here. It's basically all the things that have occurred in order to get a release out the door. And you can see a running list of debug messages in here. You'll get error messages in here as well. You'll see a bunch of other operations as well that are kicking off. If you're doing a Kubernetes deployment, for example, you'll see object status, your pods, and other things like that. And so you'll see all of this stuff happen, and then you'll get this nice, congratulations, your first deployment. So there you go. But you can see there's our little message that we put into our run a scripts message. So hello, Octopus 101. But you get the idea is that this is executed that and then followed the series of steps that you defined for this release. So the release has been defined. And now if I jump over to the overview, this is basically your dashboard. This is where a lot of folks sit when they use Octopus, is that they'll typically look at their dashboard, and this will define sort of like their mission control, if you will. So here you'll see your projects, you'll see the various environments that you want to deploy to, and then you can promote from here, for example, from deployment to staging and then on to production. And so that's essentially Octopus 101 in a nutshell. There's lots of stuff that you can see, obviously, that are available to you. But again, that's just kicking the tires, as they say. So let me just go ahead and show off some of the things that you saw. So in a more elaborate example, you might see something that looks like this. So this is an example of a more detailed deployment process. In here, you can see things like a visual representation of the deployment process itself. This includes things like conditions. So you can say if the previous step failed or if it succeeded, go ahead and run these subsequent steps. You can also have the notion of what are called child steps. So child steps are ones that run as part of a deployment process and can either all fail, for example. We have detailed notes, which are available based in Markdown. This is nice if you're looking at the deployment process for the first time and you're doing this as part of a team and you want to see what's happening there. You can also have steps execute in parallel. So you can have these concurrently run and that's denoted by that equal sign there. And so if you want to do things like say, hey, send a Slack message over there and do a deployment over there, send an email and wait for some person to intervene, that we call that a manual intervention. That's where a human has to get involved in a deployment. You can do all those things in parallel if you so wish. And then in addition to that, you can also look at a variety of environment labels. So environment labels are those environments that I specified earlier. So development, staging, and production. And I can say in my deployment process, what steps execute against what environments if I so wish. So that's, again, part of the model that I talked about earlier. So jumping back to our demo here, you can see that if we jump in here, there's a variety of other things that I can do as well. So this is my deployment process that I defined here. This is just running one step, and this is run a script. But as I said before, there's a variety of other things as well that I can do. So I can come in here, and let's say I can deploy to IIS. And when you utilize one of these steps, for example, let's say I'm deploying to IIS, the web server for Windows, I can specify a variety of other options as well. So one of the things that we do is each of these steps is very knowledgeable about the things that it's targeting. So we've taken the time to basically understand all of the things that come in for doing a deployment to IIS, for example. So, and that also includes all the other substeps as well that we've done. So like if you're deploying to Nginx or you're deploying to Azure or AWS, for example, there are a variety of things that you need to set. And we understand all of those things as far as the steps are concerned. So you can see here, I want to specify a website, or maybe I want to create a web app as well. I have to specify the variety of settings here. Maybe if I want to, I can configure the application pool, the app pool that is associated with this website, as well as I can specify a variety of other things as well. Like if I have any .NET configs that I want to specify in a config file, remember that deployment also permeates down to the files that you actually put on a machine. So, typically in a .NET scenario, for example, you'll have what are called config files, and config files have a number of settings. You can modify those as part of the deployment directly within Octopus, and we'll propagate those values. In addition to that, and I'm not going to go ahead and save this value here, but in addition to that, if I wanted to, I could specify a variety of project variables. So project variables are really interesting because what they allow you to do is specify different values for different cases in different scenarios. So if, let's say, for example, I want to define a variable here. I could go ahead and define one. I could say hello 101, for example. I could give it a value. Now I can have a variety of value types here. So I can specify credentials. I can specify certificates. I can specify a value that may be sensitive. Those values, those sensitive values, by the way, remain secure and only are utilized as part of the deployment process. So if you have a teammate or a team member that is using this and they're looking at this, you don't have to worry about sensitive values being leaked inadvertently. These are write-only values, so these and other values you can specify. So I can specify like a sensitive value if I want. I could specify it once and once only. And I can also define scope for these variables. So when I define variables, I will use these as in conjunction with my steps in my deployment process. And I can also scope these variables. I'm like, listen, this variable is only used for example, these types of environments. I only want to use this variable for staging, or I want to change its value based on the scope that it falls under. So in this example here, staging would be one value for, the variable for deployment and staging would be one value, but for another value, it may be different. So I can define these and other variables as part of this. If I wanted to use these values, for example, I could go ahead and reference these directly within my script steps or other steps as well. We have a format called Octostash. Octostash is basically our sort of like markup, if you will, and you can insert a wide variety of values. We have a number of built-in variables as part of a runtime environment. So these are denoted by Octopus, but you can define your own as well. So if you wanted to, you could execute those as well. So let's say if I wanted to, for whatever reason, I wanted to output the value of the account name inside of this script, I could go ahead and do so simply by referencing that value. And so these and other values come into effect when executing variables as part of this context, which is super helpful. By the way, I just wanted to take a moment here and just remind you that the Q&A pane is open. And if you have any questions at all, I'm going to answer them live as we go. So feel free to submit any questions you have. And let me know if there's anything that you would like to see. In addition, I'm happy to take the demo in a different direction. That's all good. But these and other sort of aspects you can see within the UI itself. The other thing that I want to mention is that all the operations that I'm conducting here are underpinned by an API. So that's super important because a lot of times you want to paint outside the line, so to speak. So especially when talking about CI/CD, you want to define a pipeline or a process, and maybe there's things that you want to do in an automated fashion that aren't supported directly through the UI, or maybe there's some custom sort of variation on this that you want to do. All of our APIs are available to use, and everything that you see here in the UI is available or driving itself through the API itself. So under the covers, we utilize an API for driving all of this stuff. And so that turns out to be really powerful because it gives you the ability, essentially, as I said, to paint outside the lines if you want. So these are other operations you can certainly do if you so choose. All right. So congratulations, you've seen your first deployment, and there's a lot of nuances to that. So let me just go ahead and show you another example here of something that's a little bit different in terms of how we go about deployment, and that is with a CI process or server. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to another dashboard. This is the sort of Julia Child's cooking show moment of like, here's one I created earlier, and pulling out the finished product out of the oven. So this is another environment that I have, and I'm going to go and take a look at the deployment process here. So you can see that this is a far more elaborate process defined as part of this project. So you can see here I have a variety of steps. This is actually utilizing a deployment process for a database. So yes, you can deploy to databases, and yes, you can integrate with tools. In fact, we're utilizing a integration we have with a product called Flyway. Flyway is a product from a company called Redgate. It's a wonderful product, allows you to do a variety of things. You can do, dry runs of database checks. You can compare schemas. You can validate that certain operations are going to, succeed, etc. And so you can do that if you so wish. We have integration steps with, for example, Slack. So Slack and Teams turn out to be very popular in terms of what customers are doing with Octopus. And that turns out to be really nice because oftentimes you want to notify other people, hey, we're doing a deployment, this deployment's about to execute, etc. In addition to that, we also have things like manual intervention. So a manual intervention is a process by which we will pause and hold the deployment process until someone comes along, myself or maybe a teammate, comes along and approves the deployment to continue, or maybe denies it. This is really important, especially when a human has to be involved. So in this example here, a DBA is going to review the migration scripts that's generated via Flyway and notify them, hey, this needs to be approved. So there has to be a pair of eyes that has to go over the migration script. So we're going to create these tables, modify these tables, delete these tables, update this data, etc. Please validate that, hit submit, approve, or deny, and we will continue on our merry way. So these are some of the things that you can do in the context of Octopus, which is great. There's a bunch of other things that we haven't touched on in this. We talk about things like channels, etc. Don't worry about that for now. Just understand that a deployment process is a series of steps. Steps can execute either in parallel or one by one. They have a set of conditions associated with them. Either they succeeded or they failed, and you can have steps follow up based on those executions. We have a variety of other operations and settings as well that you can take a look at. So we have things like start triggers, we have run conditions, we can specify if these steps are required or not. Another option that we have at our disposal is the ability to specify things like do a retry. So if I come down here, you'll notice that these are new features that we've added, retries and timeouts. So a step can have a number of times that it can execute something. This is really useful in the case of, let's say I'm doing an FTP deployment via Azure, and I can have a step retry if the network is flaky. So this gives you a little bit more resiliency or robustness in terms of your deployment process if the network has high latency, for example. A timeout feature, which is for a step, is also a nice, powerful feature, which allows you to say, hey, after a certain threshold in minutes, so let's say 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, if this step has not completed, mark that as failed. And so that turns out to be important because oftentimes these things, different systems are different, and sometimes you have to take time associated with those, and so you don't want to sit there indefinitely. And so being able to mark these as timed out is really important. All right, so we have a question here. Let me go ahead and highlight this question. So Jim asks, in a scenario where you have multiple deployments waiting for QA testing, tested in staging, let's say A, B, and A fails, how do you handle skipping A and deploying B? So this is, this is something that happens all the time with customers. So if you have multiple deployments queued up, you can see them as part of your task log. So you'll see those actually occur. And a nice feature that we're adding soon is the ability to resort those task logs. So if you're at all curious, this is not a plant, but thank you for asking this. I really appreciate it. So if you go to our roadmap, this is at roadmap.octopus.com. You'll see a set of features that we're thinking about, and reprioritizing the task queue is one of those features. So if you take a look at this, what this would look like in, for example, Octopus itself. So you'll be able to take the tasks that are executing and resort them. And this will give you the ability to resort those as part of those processes, which is great. And that's part of the answer to your question, which is basically if you have multiple things happening at once and you want them to occur in a certain way, make sure that you can reorder those things. That turns out to be pretty important. And so there's a lot of different ways in which you can control this. You can also inspect these values as part of your values for using OctoStash. So you can check the values of these things. You can utilize a capability called runbooks as well. So runbooks are these are operations that you can conduct based on these are like recipes for operations that you will typically do in a sort of emergency scenario, but you can certainly use these in the context of deployments as well. So there's lots of ways in which you can handle those things in terms of those scenarios. So there's a lot of options available to you. Jumping over into the chat, I'm going to go ahead and add something here to the Q&A. So let's go ahead and highlight this message. Thank you for your question, by the way, Jim. So Nicholas asked something a little more specific about manual intervention. Is it possible to integrate AD groups for the users able to approve a manual intervention step? So the manual intervention step is going to be something that will require a user can log into Octopus. So users are defined as part of Octopus, and we have a notion of what is called Octopus ID, which has integration for AD and a variety of other auth providers and directory stores. So you can define those as part of your infrastructure. And there's a lot of different settings that you'll define. So going into your configuration, you can define your users inline here. I use this as a test for testing Terraform and such, so you'll see those things. But you can specify a variety of user accounts here, and you can also set these things up as part of your integration with remote directories. So this is all part of the settings integration that you'll have. So when looking at AD integration, this is definitely something that we can support. You will log in via AD through Octopus and then approve or deny those steps of manual intervention as part of that process. So that's basically part of the auth process, which I've already skipped over. But you're turning on general auth, this is available there. Azure AD auth is here, for example. Those roles that you define in AD will obviously be propagated within Octopus and will be enforced in that manner. So if you're looking to either approve or deny steps as part of a manual intervention, you can go ahead and do so as part of that process with AD integration. Thank you for the question, Nicholas. That's a great question. Awesome. All right. So jumping back to my demo, and if you have any other questions, feel free to ask. We're going to do this all live. Oh, I didn't mark this one as answered. Let's mark that one as answered. There you go. See, we're live. There you go. So, all right. So jumping back to my example, this example here actually kicks off via GitHub Actions. And this is something I want to show off, basically kind of rounding out the story here. So you've seen everything in terms of Octopus, but that's when you have the bits available, the packages available. That's when you have full control over the environment. But how does life start with a deployment? It typically starts with a CI process, and that's typically in an environment like GitHub, or maybe utilizing something like TeamCity or Azure DevOps. And I'm going to show you 3 examples of that, of how things happen. So if you haven't seen GitHub Actions before, don't worry. And if you haven't seen YAML before, really don't worry. It's not a big deal. But YAML is basically a configuration language that allows you to define a bunch of things that you want to do as part of a process. In this example here, which is utilizing this Octopus instance in the backend, this is utilizing this GitHub action as part of this process. All this, by the way, that I'm showing you here is available in our public repo, so you can check this out for yourself. But this is the build.yaml file that's defined. And you'll notice that there's a lot of script here. Don't worry about this. This is just a lot of stuff that happens when we do a build. This is for a .NET application, but this could be any type of application. It could be a Java application, it could be a web application. It really doesn't matter. But down here, as part of my CI process, you'll notice that I'm using these tasks. So in YAML, you'll define a workflow, essentially. And these are denoted by these hyphens here as part of what's called a job. So you give a job a name. This is GitHub Actions. If you haven't seen this before, don't worry. But a job has a name, and then the series of steps that execute are these steps that you see here. So very much like what you saw in Octopus, where you have a series of steps. It's the same thing here, but it's in a text-based format. Down here near the bottom, this is where we start integrating with Octopus. So, for example, if I wanted to upload a package could be like any binary that you have. We have a what's called a GitHub action for that, and you can push that package to Octopus simply by using this step that we integrate. If I want to integrate what's called build information are the SHA hashes and all the things that went into creating a binary. And this turns out to be pretty important if you want to create release notes, etc. You can go ahead and tell us about that as well. The step that I showed you earlier in the demo where I create a release, you can do that. Like I said, this is all based on APIs. We're targeting the API for creating a release here. So I can create a release directly within GitHub Actions if I so choose. I can also deploy that release directly from GitHub Actions. So this is utilizing Octopus Deploy under the covers via GitHub Actions if I wanted to. So there's lots of different ways in which I can kick this off. If you want to see these GitHub Actions, you can simply go up to the marketplace and search for Octopus. And you can see these are all the actions that we have associated with Octopus inside of GitHub Marketplace. So you can, upload packages, you can create and deploy releases, you can run runbooks, you can create releases for tenants, for example. Tenants is a whole other thing that we haven't talked about. Don't worry about that. But these and other actions are available there. In addition to that, you can also use it with other CI processes. So, for example, I can use it with TeamCity. So TeamCity is a very popular CI server from JetBrains, and this is the integration available up on the marketplace. To show you an example of this running in TeamCity itself, this is one of the things that we use internally for our marketing team. And so you can see TeamCity has this notion of what are called plugins. It has a bunch of plugins built in out of the box, and you can utilize these as part of a build process. If you search for Octopus, you'll see those similar steps available there, and I can define these as part of a build process within TeamCity. So TeamCity's UI is a little bit different than GitHub Actions, so it differs a little bit, but you'll see it permeate there, and you can actually create releases, deploy releases, etc. There's a lot of different things you can do there. Looking at another example, so for example, Azure Pipelines. So Azure DevOps is the collection of tools that Microsoft provides for a variety of things, including source control, etc. Azure Pipelines is the way you define the processes for doing CI and CD, etc. And so integrating with that turns out to be pretty easy because we have a plugin for that as well. So you can see these are the variety of plugins that we have support for. So you can install what's called our CLI or command line interface. So the CLI will allow you to basically target anything you want relative to Octopus. You can, do a bunch of different operations, but we also have curated steps as well. So these are steps that you define as part of a process for things like pushing a package, creating a release, deploying a release, etc. So these and other steps you can do directly within an environment like Azure DevOps. And this is kind of how we round out the story for your CI integration as well. Excellent. Another thing I want to mention is that we also have a series of guides. So one of the common questions we get from customers is like, look, I understand what you're saying. Like, I get that you've got, Octopus for deployment and you can do integration with, other CI processes, but I would love to see a visceral example of this. We have over 70 videos that you can see. And the great thing here is you can pick and choose. So you can say, look, I've got Git for source control. I'm targeting maybe Ruby. My build server is Jenkins, and I want to use Octopus, and my target is maybe Firefly. And if there is a video available, we have over 70 available. You can go ahead and choose and pick the one that you want. We will go ahead and show those to you. And we also, in addition to reading the tutorial as well, you can actually watch the video of the tutorial. And we have a bunch of test VMs as well if you want. But we basically provide you step-by-step instructions to get this all set up and ready. So it turns out to be pretty nice. And those are our guides, which is available through our docs, which is awesome. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and stop sharing and answer a few more questions. So Jeffrey asks, in the instance where a manual step can be added into a script for a particular runbook, how feasible will it be to make it manual when it can be added to the script, or are special cases that are not added in the script? So I guess what you're asking here is script versus a specific manual intervention step. It turns out that these things are pretty much the same thing. So you can actually execute these directly in script. You can have full control if you want and run scripts directly, or you can use our curated steps if you wish as well. The difference here is that a manual intervention step is a hard stop in terms of the deployment process. We will hold the deployment process up in a manual intervention step, and then ask for an approve or deny operation from a human as part of that process. Now, when I talk about runbooks in terms of your earlier question, when have multiple deployment processes occurring, that is a series of other substeps that you want to run as part of a deployment process. You can kick those things off very easily as part of your deployment process. You can have runbooks as part of your process if you want, but typically they're used for operation procedures, so things like emergency plans, etc. But I mention it there because it is something that you can fall back to if you wish. But as I said before, we give you full control over that through script steps if you want. But like I said, there's a whole host of things that you can take a look at. If you're at all curious, you can also take a look at our library through a different means. We actually have a website which will give you a sense of what's available there. So if you go to library.octopus.com, there you will see a series of steps that have been written by the community. And so we have over 500 steps available, and you can see all the steps that are available there. These are also in conjunction with the ones that we have built into the product as well. So if you're all curious, you can take a look there. If there's one that you want to use, like say, for example, let's say I'm going to target Nginx for a particular example, or I want to say AWS is important for me, or maybe Google something, I don't know, Firebase, for example. These and other things that we actually support, or if they're not supported, they are supported through our community library, which is available at library.octopus.com. So that's definitely something that we're checking out, which is awesome. Great. That is all the questions I see in the Q&A pane at the moment. I'll just hold for a couple seconds here in case anyone has any other questions. Again, we run these monthly. Just to round up the conversation, just wanted to show a couple of other pages here just to let folks know. So again, show my screen. So on November 15th, we're running an event. We are running a virtual event called Shipped. So you can find out more by visiting octopus.com/shipped. And there you'll see a page that looks like this. If you want, you can attend. Please feel free to register. This is a series of talks that we'll be having from a variety of people within Octopus, including our founder and CEO, Paul. And so if you're all curious, you can check out this virtual event that's coming. This is an all-day event. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things relative to the product, which is awesome. And we're going to talk about, not only what we're doing now, but also into the future. So feel free to check that out. Another resource I would like to point you to is our webinars. As I said before, this is our monthly webinar that we're running called Octopus 101. You can register for other webinars. We have partner webinars. We have webinars on particular technologies like Kubernetes. We're talking about things like platform engineering. Again, that's at octopus.com/webinars. We are we're going to a variety of events as well. You'll find these at octopus.com/events. And as I said before, everything you'll find available through our website. We're really, really good at putting everything available online, and that includes all our resources as well. So if you're interested in our docs, you're interested in our tools, you wanted to kick the tires, for example, you can go ahead and do so. Our docs are very extensive. We have a bunch of end-to-end tutorials. We have a bunch of training videos. In addition to that, you can go to our YouTube channel if you want. These and other resources are available there and all linked through our website at octopus.com. All right, that was enough tap dancing for me. I will then go back to the Q&A page. No other questions? There you go. That's fine. That's fine. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for joining me for this monthly installment of Octopus 101. Really nice to see you. And feel free to check out next month's, which we'll publish very soon. Until next time, happy deployments. Take care.